My husband died leaving $5 million to our son, and debts to me. When I asked my son for help, his wife blocked me. A bankrupt woman cannot be part of a millionaire family. Desperate, I called my husband's former partner's son, the boy whose college tuition I paid. No one knew he had become a millionaire Wall Street lawyer. When the 18 black cars pulled up in front of the house, he said just one sentence: "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Norma, and I never thought I would find myself standing on my own son's doorstep, begging for help." At 70 years old, with arthritis making my hands shake and my heart medication barely keeping me upright, I clutched the eviction notice in my trembling fingers as I rang the doorbell of Marshall's mansion. The house stood before me like a monument to everything I had lost. Georgian columns, manicured gardens, a circular driveway with 2 luxury cars parked like sentinels. This was the life my husband Robert had built, the life our son now enjoyed while I faced losing everything. The door opened, and there she was, Kinsley. My daughter-in-law's perfectly styled blonde hair caught the afternoon sunlight, her designer clothes pristine as always. But it was her expression that made my stomach drop, that look of barely concealed disgust, as if I were something unpleasant she had found on the bottom of her shoe. "Norma." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "What are you doing here?" "I need to speak with Marshall," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's important." She crossed her arms, her diamond bracelet catching the light. The same bracelet I had helped Robert pick out for her last Christmas. "He's busy. Please, Kinsley, I just need a few minutes." I held up the notice with shaking hands. "I'm going to lose the apartment, the medical bills from Robert's treatment. They're demanding payment and I—" "Stop right there." Her voice cut through my explanation like a blade. "Let me make something very clear to you, Norma. Bankrupts can't be here." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually took a step backward, nearly stumbling on the pristine marble steps. "Excuse me?" I whispered. Kinsley stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind her as if to prevent my desperation from contaminating her perfect home. "You heard me. A bankrupt woman cannot be part of a millionaire family. It's embarrassing." I felt my knees go weak. This was my son's wife, the woman I had welcomed into our family, the mother of my grandchildren. "Kinsley, please. I'm not asking for charity, Robert's will. Surely there was something." She let out a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Oh, there was something all right. Debts. Lots and lots of debts. Medical bills, business loans, credit card payments. Congratulations, Norma. Your husband left you quite the inheritance." My mouth went dry. "But Marshall inherited $5 million, yes, because Marshall is Robert's son, and he deserves to carry on the family legacy without being dragged down by financial irresponsibility." Financial irresponsibility? I could barely get the words out. I worked 2 jobs to help Robert build his business. I took care of his father when he was dying. You what? Made coffee and answered phones? Norma, please. Marshall has a reputation to maintain, a position in society. He can't be associated with this. She gestured at me as if I were something diseased. I heard footsteps inside the house, and my heart jumped. Marshall, my son. Surely when he saw me, when he understood what was happening, he would make this right. "Marshall," I called out, my voice cracking. "Marshall, please!" The footsteps stopped. I could see his shadow through the frosted glass of the front door, just standing there, waiting, listening. "Marshall?" I called again, louder this time, desperation making my voice shrill. Kinsley smirked. "He's not coming out, Norma. We discussed this. It's better this way." "Better?" I stared at her in disbelief. "How is this better? I'm his mother, and he's a successful businessman with a family to protect. Do you really think it's fair to drag him down with your problems? Haven't you done enough damage?" The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking, but it was the silence from inside the house that truly broke my heart. My son, the little boy I had carried for 9 months, nursed through every illness, celebrated every achievement with, was standing just feet away, and he was letting this happen. I don't understand, I whispered, more to myself than to her. The will reading. The lawyer said Robert had arranged everything, that there would be provisions. Kinsley's smile was sharp as a knife. Oh, there were provisions, all right. Very specific ones. Robert was quite thorough about distinguishing between his successful heirs and his liabilities. I felt something inside me crumble. Liabilities. That's what my husband of 42 years had considered me in the end. A liability. The apartment rent is $3,000 a month, I said quietly. One last desperate attempt. I have Medicare, but it doesn't cover everything. The cancer treatment, the medications. I just need help until I can figure something out. Figure something out? Kinsley laughed again. Norma, you're 70 years old. What exactly are you going to figure out? No, I think it's time you accepted reality. Some people are destined for success, and some people are destined to be burdens. It's not personal. It's just life. She reached into her purse and pulled out a crisp $20 bill. Here, buy yourself a nice meal on the way home. Consider it a farewell gift. I stared at the money she held out to me like I was a beggar on the street corner. $20 for 40 years of devotion to this family, for raising the son who now wouldn't even face me, for the nights I spent holding Robert's hand as chemotherapy ravaged his body. Keep it, I said quietly. Suit yourself. She tucked the bill back into her purse. But Norma? Don't come back here. Marshall has moved on, and it's time you did the same. Find a nice little subsidized housing unit somewhere. Make friends with the other unfortunates. Build a life that matches your circumstances. I turned to leave, my legs unsteady, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give out right there on their perfectly manicured lawn. But as I reached the edge of the driveway, I heard the front door open again. For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Marshall. Finally. But it was just Kinsley's voice, calling out one last cruelty. Oh, and Norma? Don't try to contact the grandchildren. I won't have them exposed to this kind of instability. It wouldn't be fair to them. The door slammed shut with a finality that echoed in my bones. I made it to my old Honda before the tears came. 42 years of marriage, 35 years of motherhood, and this is how it ended. Sitting in a rusted car in front of my son's mansion, sobbing like a child while my arthritic hands fumbled with the keys. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of movement in an upstairs window. Marshall, watching from behind the curtains as his mother disappeared from his life forever, or so he thought. The eviction notice arrived exactly 7 days after my visit to Marshall's house. 7 days of hoping the phone would ring, that my son would come to his senses and remember the mother who had sacrificed everything for him. 7 days of checking my mailbox for some sign that Robert had left me more than crushing debt and humiliation. Instead, I got a certified letter that gave me 30 days to vacate the only home I had left. I sat at my tiny kitchen table, the paper trembling in my hands as I read it for the 4th time. Failure to remit payment in the amount of $9,000. 3 months' rent. I had been living on my small Social Security check and the meager savings Robert left me, but between the medical bills that kept arriving and the basic cost of staying alive, every penny had already been spoken for. My phone rang, and for a moment my heart leaped. Maybe. Mrs. Holloway? This is Jennifer from Med Bill Services. I'm calling about your outstanding balance of $14,600 for your husband's oncology treatments. I closed my eyes. I told you already. I'm waiting for the estate to settle. There should be insurance. Ma'am, we've been very patient, but it's been 4 months since Mr. Holloway's passing. We need to arrange a payment plan immediately, or we'll have no choice but to pursue collection. After she hung up, I sat in the silence of my cramped apartment, surrounded by the life Robert and I had built together. 42 years reduced to a 1-bedroom rental that smelled like the Indian restaurant downstairs. The wedding china we'd saved for special occasions sat in a box in the corner. I'd had to sell the dining room set to pay for Robert's medications. I found myself thinking about the early days, when Marshall was small and money was tight, but we were happy. I had worked as a receptionist at Robert's fledgling construction company while he built his reputation one small job at a time. Evenings, after Marshall was asleep, I would help Robert with the books, preparing invoices and tracking expenses on our kitchen table while he planned the next day's work. Those were good times. We had dreams then. Robert would talk about the empire he was going to build, the legacy he would leave for Marshall. I would listen and believe, because I loved him and because I could see the fire in his eyes when he talked about the future, and I had helped make that future happen. When Robert landed his first big commercial contract, I was the one who convinced the bank to extend our credit line. When he needed to buy expensive equipment, I was the one who suggested we mortgage the house. When his business partner Lance died suddenly, leaving behind a teenage son named Damien, I was the one who insisted we pay for the boy's college education. It's what Lance would have done for Marshall, I had told Robert. Besides, Damien's brilliant. He'll make something of himself. Robert had agreed, though I could see the reluctance in his face. $30,000 for Damien's tuition was money we could barely spare, but it was the right thing to do. Lance had been more than Robert's business partner. He had been his best friend, the brother Robert never had. I wondered what had become of Damien. The last I'd heard, he had graduated from law school and moved to New York. That was almost 15 years ago. He'd sent a thank you note when he passed the bar exam, promising to pay us back someday. But life moves on, people forget, and honestly, we had never expected anything in return. The irony wasn't lost on me now. I had helped pay for a stranger's education while my own son stood by and watched me lose everything. My reflection was interrupted by a knock at the door. For a wild moment, I thought it might be Marshall, finally coming to make things right. Instead, I opened it to find Mrs. Chen, my elderly neighbor from across the hall. "Norma, dear," she said, her worried face creased with concern. "I heard shouting earlier. Are you all right?" I realized she must have overheard my conversation with the debt collector. The walls in this building were thin, and Mrs. Chen had excellent hearing for an 80-year-old. "I'm fine," I lied, but my voice cracked on the words. Mrs. Chen stepped into my apartment without being invited, her eyes taking in the boxes, the sparse furniture, the overall aura of a life being dismantled piece by piece. "Oh, honey," she said softly. "What's happening?" Something about her kindness, the first genuine compassion I'd received since Robert's death, broke something inside me. I found myself telling her everything. About the will, about Kinsley's cruelty, about Marshall's cowardice, about the mounting bills and the eviction notice and the crushing realization that the life I'd spent 70 years building was crumbling around me. Mrs. Chen listened without judgment, occasionally patting my hand or making soft sounds of sympathy. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Your son," she said finally. "He really won't help you?" I shook my head. "Kinsley has convinced him I'm some kind of liability, that helping me would somehow damage his reputation. And your husband really left you nothing but debts." "According to the lawyer, yes. Everything went to Marshall. The business, the investments, even the house we lived in for 20 years. Robert had transferred it all to Marshall's name before he died, supposedly for tax purposes." Mrs. Chen frowned. "That doesn't sound right, dear. In my experience, men don't usually leave their wives with nothing, especially after 40 years of marriage." "Robert was sick for so long," I said tiredly. Maybe he wasn't thinking clearly, or maybe Kinsley influenced him somehow. She was always there during his treatments, being so helpful, so caring. I thought it was wonderful at the time, my daughter-in-law taking such good care of her father-in-law. But even as I said it, something nagged at me. Kinsley had indeed been very involved in Robert's care during those final months. She had driven him to appointments when I was too exhausted to function, had handled communications with his doctors and lawyers. I had been grateful for her help, so overwhelmed with grief and fear that I hadn't questioned her sudden dedication to her dying father-in-law. Now I wondered if there had been more to her helpfulness than family loyalty. Mrs. Chen stayed for another hour, helping me sort through papers and pack more of my belongings. As she prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "Norma, I want you to think about something. You said you helped pay for that boy's education. Lance's son. Damien, was it? I nodded. Well, honey, maybe it's time you called in that favor. After she left, I sat alone with her words echoing in my mind. It had been so many years since I'd thought about Damien Cooper. He'd been such a sweet boy, devastated by his father's sudden heart attack, terrified about his future. I remembered how young he'd looked sitting at our kitchen table while Robert explained that they would take care of his college expenses. You don't owe us anything, I had told him when he'd tried to thank me. Just make your father proud. I went to my bedroom closet and pulled down the old shoebox where I kept mementos from Robert's business days. Somewhere in there was Damien's law school graduation announcement, and maybe, if I was lucky, some way to contact him. As I searched through the yellowed papers, I found myself thinking about what Mrs. Chen had said. Something about Robert's will didn't feel right. My husband had his faults, but he wasn't cruel. Even if Kinsley had influenced him, even if he'd been confused by medication or fear, would he really have left me with nothing? For the first time since the will reading, I felt a tiny spark of something that wasn't despair. It might have been hope, or it might have been the beginning of something much more dangerous. I found Damien's business card tucked between my old address book and a stack of Christmas cards from years past. The paper was cream-colored, expensive-looking, with embossed lettering that read, Damien Cooper, Esquire Corporate Law, Goldman, Sachs & Associates, Wall Street, New York. My hands shook as I held it. This couldn't be the same sweet boy I remembered, could it? The one who used to help me carry groceries when he visited his father at Robert's office? The teenager who cried at Lance's funeral while I held his hand and promised him everything would be okay? I had found the card 3 days ago, but it took me until now, sitting in my nearly empty apartment with another collection call still ringing in my ears, to work up the courage to dial the number. The phone rang once, twice. I almost hung up. Cooper Law Offices, this is Amanda speaking. How may I direct your call? My voice came out as a croak. I cleared my throat and tried again. I'm looking for Damien Cooper. My name is Norma Holloway. May I ask what this is regarding? It's personal. I'm an old family friend. Please hold while I check Mr. Cooper's availability. The wait felt endless. Soft classical music played while I rehearsed what I would say. How do you tell someone you helped raise that you're now destitute? How do you ask for help from someone you haven't spoken to in 15 years? Mrs. Holloway? The voice that came on the line was deeper than I remembered, confident and professional, but there was something familiar in the cadence that made my heart skip. Damien? My God, Mrs. Holloway, is it really you? It's me, sweetheart. The endearment slipped out before I could stop it, the same one I used to call him when he was young. There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer, warmer. I can't believe it. How are you? How's Mr. Holloway? It's been years. The kindness in his voice nearly undid me. I had to press my lips together to keep from crying right there on the phone. Robert passed away 4 months ago, Damien. Oh, Mrs. Holloway, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Thank you. I took a shaky breath. Damien, I know this is going to sound strange, calling you out of the blue like this, but I need help. Of course, anything. What's going on? The concern in his voice reminded me so much of his father. Lance had been the same way, quick to offer help, slow to judge. It gave me the courage to continue. It's complicated. Robert's will. There were irregularities. I've been left with nothing but debts and my son. My son won't help me. Silence on the other end. Then, I'm sorry, did you say irregularities? The will left everything to Marshall, $5 million, and I inherited only the debts. Medical bills, business loans. The lawyer said it was all legal, but Damien, it doesn't make sense. Robert wasn't cruel. He wouldn't have left me with nothing. Mrs. Holloway, who handled the estate? What firm? Patterson, Williams & Associates. Do you know them? Another pause, longer this time. I know of them. Mrs. Holloway, I need to ask you something, and please don't take offense. But did anyone help Robert with his estate planning? Anyone who might have influenced his decisions? I thought about Kinsley, always so helpful during Robert's illness, always offering to drive him to appointments, to handle the legal paperwork that exhausted him so much. My daughter-in-law was very involved, I said slowly. Kinsley. She said she wanted to help, to take the burden off me while I was caring for Robert. I see. His tone had changed, become more alert. Mrs. Holloway, I want you to know that what you're describing, a spouse being completely cut out of an estate after 42 years of marriage, it's extremely unusual, suspicious even. Suspicious how? In most states, including yours, there are laws protecting surviving spouses. It's very difficult to completely disinherit a wife, even if someone wanted to. The fact that this happened, especially with someone else so closely involved in the process. He trailed off, but I could hear him thinking, processing the information like the lawyer he'd become. Mrs. Holloway, I need to ask you something else. Do you trust me? Of course I do. Then I want you to listen very carefully. Don't sign anything else. Don't agree to any payment plans or settlements. Don't make any decisions about your living situation. Can you do that for me? Damien, I'm being evicted. I have 23 days to find somewhere else to live. I understand. But I think there's more to this story than what you were told. I'm going to make some calls, do some research. In the meantime, I'm going to wire you some money to cover your immediate expenses. No, the word came out sharper than I intended. Damien, I didn't call you for money. I didn't know who else to talk to. Mrs. Holloway. His voice was gentle but firm. Do you remember what you told me when I tried to thank you for paying for college? I wiped my eyes, remembering. I said you didn't owe us anything. That's right. And you know what you said after that? I smiled despite myself. I said to make your father proud. Well, I did. I made him proud. And I made you proud too, I hope. I became exactly the kind of lawyer who helps people when they're being taken advantage of. So please, let me help you now. Not because I owe you, because I love you. You were more of a mother to me during those years than anyone else. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. For the first time since Robert died, someone was treating me like I mattered, like I deserved help, like I was worth something. Damien, I managed through my sobs. There's something else. About the will. The lawyer, Mr. Patterson. He seemed nervous. He kept looking at my daughter-in-law during the reading, like he was waiting for her approval or something. Interesting. I could hear papers rustling on his end. Mrs. Holloway, I'm going to need you to gather every document you have related to Robert's death and the estate. Medical records, legal documents, anything Kinsley might have signed on Robert's behalf. Can you do that? Yes, good. I'm also going to need the exact dates of when Robert signed his will and any amendments. If Kinsley was as involved as you say, there should be a paper trail. Damien, what are you thinking? I'm thinking that maybe your husband didn't betray you after all. I'm thinking someone else did. The possibility hit me like electricity. Could it be true? Could Robert have been manipulated, coerced somehow into signing documents that went against his true wishes? It seemed impossible, but then again, so had Marshall's abandonment. Mrs. Holloway, I need you to do one more thing for me. I need you to stay strong. Can you do that? I'll try. No, not try. Do. Because if I'm right about this, if someone manipulated a dying man and stole your inheritance, then we're going to make sure they pay for it. All of them. There was something in his voice I'd never heard before. A steel edge that reminded me that the sweet boy I remembered had grown into a man who commanded respect in courtrooms across the country. Damien? How successful did you become? He laughed, and for a moment I heard the boy I used to know. Let's just say that the college education you and Mr. Holloway provided gave me opportunities I never dreamed of. I've done well for myself, Mrs. Holloway. Very well. Good. Lance would be proud. I hope so. And, Mrs. Holloway, I want you to know that everything's going to change now. You called me at exactly the right time, because I've been waiting years for a chance to repay what you did for me. Now I have it. After we hung up, I sat in my empty apartment feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Real, tangible hope that maybe this nightmare wasn't over. That maybe there was still justice in the world. 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was my bank, calling to inform me that $50,000 had been deposited into my account. For the first time since Robert's death, I smiled. 3 weeks later, I sat across from Damien in his Manhattan office, and I could barely believe the man he'd become. Gone was the uncertain boy who used to help me with groceries. In his place sat a confident, impeccably dressed attorney whose corner office overlooked Wall Street. The boy I'd helped raise had grown into someone who clearly commanded both respect and significant resources. But when he smiled at me, I could still see traces of the teenager who used to call me Mom Number 2 when he thought no one was listening. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, setting down a thick folder of documents. "I have good news and bad news. Which would you like first?" "The bad news. I've gotten used to it." His expression grew serious. "The bad news is that what happened to you was definitely not an accident. It was carefully orchestrated fraud. Your daughter-in-law, working with the attorney who handled Robert's estate, manipulated a dying man into signing documents that violated both his original wishes and state law." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd suspected as much. "And the good news?" Damien smiled, and there was something predatory in it. "The good news is that they were incredibly sloppy about it. They left a paper trail that a first-year law student could follow." "Us?" He opened the folder and spread documents across his mahogany desk. "Let me walk you through what really happened during your husband's final months." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. First, Robert's original will, filed 18 months before his death. He pointed to a document covered in legal language. "In this version, you inherit 60% of his assets. Marshall inherits 35%, and 5% goes to various charities. Standard, sensible estate planning for a man who loved his wife." Then what happened? Then Robert got sick, and Kinsley stepped in to help. Damien's tone made it clear what he thought of her assistance. 3 months before Robert died, she convinced him that his affairs were too complicated for you to handle while you were caring for him. She offered to take over communications with his lawyer. He pulled out another document. "This is a power of attorney, signed by Robert, giving Kinsley the right to handle his legal affairs. Perfectly legal, and on the surface, it looks like the action of a caring daughter-in-law. But look at the date." He pointed to the signature line. "This was signed on February 15th. Do you remember what happened that day?" I thought back, my mind foggy with grief and exhaustion. February 15th. That was the day Robert had his worst episode with the pain medication. He was completely out of it, barely conscious. Exactly. I pulled his medical records. According to his oncologist, Robert was on a morphine drip that day for pain management. He was in no condition to understand complex legal documents, much less sign them. The realization made my stomach turn. She took advantage of him while he was drugged? It gets worse. Damien pulled out more papers. 2 weeks later, with her new power of attorney, Kinsley met with Robert's lawyer, without you present, to update his estate plan. She claimed Robert was worried about tax implications and wanted to restructure everything. "What kind of restructuring?" "The kind that left you with nothing." Damien's voice was ice cold. She convinced Patterson, that's the lawyer, that Robert wanted to protect his business legacy by transferring everything directly to Marshall. She said you had agreed to it, that you preferred a simple arrangement, without the burden of managing complex assets. I stared at him in disbelief. "I never said any such thing." "I know, because I have the real documentation." He pulled out yet another folder, this one marked with the logo of a different law firm. "Mrs. Holloway, did Robert ever mention updating his will to you?" "No. He always said the original will was fine, that he trusted me to make good decisions about Marshall's inheritance when the time came." That's what I thought. Because 3 days before Kinsley obtained her power of attorney, Robert met privately with a different attorney, someone Kinsley knew nothing about. My heart started racing. "What do you mean?" "I mean your husband suspected something was wrong." He reached out to an old friend of mine, Daniel Morrison, who specializes in protecting assets from family manipulation. Robert wanted to create what's called a fail-safe will, a backup document that would override any changes made to his estate if those changes were made under questionable circumstances. Damien opened the folder and pulled out a document I'd never seen before. Mrs. Holloway, this is your husband's true final will. The one he signed when he was fully competent, without any outside influence. I took the papers with shaking hands. The legal language was complex, but the numbers at the bottom were clear enough. According to this will, I was to inherit $4 million, Marshall would receive $1.5 million, and the remaining assets would be placed in trust for my grandchildren. I don't understand, I whispered. If this exists, why wasn't it read instead of the other one? Because Robert died before he could file it with the court or inform his original lawyer. The only copies were with Daniel Morrison, who had no idea Robert had passed away until I contacted him last week. I felt dizzy. All this time, I'd been mourning not just my husband's death but his betrayal. The crushing belief that the man I loved for 42 years had abandoned me in his final act. This means Robert never betrayed you. This means he was trying to protect you from exactly what ended up happening. The tears came then, a mixture of relief and rage so intense I thought I might be sick. So what do we do now? Damien's smile was sharp as a blade. Now we prove that the will Kinsley and Patterson used was obtained through fraud. We show that Robert lacked the mental capacity to sign a power of attorney on February 15th. We demonstrate that the entire estate proceeding was based on forged or illegally obtained documents. And then we take back what was stolen from you. All of it, plus damages for what you've suffered. I thought about the months of poverty, the eviction notices, the humiliation of begging my own son for help. What about Marshall? He didn't know, did he? Damien's expression softened slightly. Based on my investigation, I don't think Marshall was actively involved in the fraud, but he benefited from it, and he chose to abandon you when you needed help. He'll have to face the consequences of both. And Kinsley orchestrated the theft of $4 million from a vulnerable widow. In some states, that's not just fraud, it's elder abuse. She could face criminal charges. The thought of my daughter-in-law in handcuffs should have given me satisfaction, but instead, I just felt tired and angry and ready for justice. Damien, there's something else I need to tell you. About Marshall's house. What about it? It used to be mine and Robert's. We lived there for 20 years, raised Marshall there. But Robert transferred the deed to Marshall about a year before he died, supposedly for tax reasons. Damien's eyebrows shot up. When, exactly? Last November, Kinsley said it would save money on estate taxes. Mrs. Holloway, do you know what your house was worth? Robert always said it was worth about $800,000. Try $1.2 million. And transferring it wasn't about taxes. It was about hiding assets from you. Damien made notes on a legal pad. This keeps getting better and better. Better? For our case. Every asset they moved, every document they forged, every lie they told, it's all evidence. Mrs. Holloway, when we're done with this, you're not just going to get your inheritance back. You're going to get justice. He leaned back in his leather chair, studying me carefully. I need to prepare you for something, though. When we move against them, and we will move against them, it's going to be dramatic, public. Your son is going to learn some very uncomfortable truths about his wife. Your family is going to be forced to confront what they did to you. I understand. Do you? Because once we start this, there's no going back. Marshall might never forgive you for destroying his marriage, even if Kinsley deserves it. I thought about my son, standing silently behind his front door while his wife humiliated me on his doorstep. About the grandchildren I'd been forbidden to see. About the months of struggling to survive while he enjoyed the fruits of money stolen from me. Damien, I said quietly. Marshall stopped being my son the day he let Kinsley throw me out like garbage. Whatever relationship we had left, she destroyed it already. Then we're going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of people they really are. As I left Damien's office that day, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Power. Real power. The kind that comes from having truth and justice and considerable resources on your side. Kinsley thought she was so clever, manipulating a dying man and discarding his widow. Marshall thought he was safe in his mansion, enjoying stolen wealth while his mother struggled to survive. They had no idea what was coming for them. The 18 black cars arrived at exactly 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, forming a perfect convoy that stretched from Marshall's circular driveway all the way to the street. I watched from the passenger seat of Damien's Mercedes as neighbors emerged from their houses, drawn by the spectacle of so much expensive automotive power descending on their exclusive neighborhood. "Are you ready for this, Mrs. Holloway?" Damien asked, adjusting his tie in the rearview mirror. Behind us, I could see his team of associates and investigators emerging from their vehicles, each carrying briefcases and files that contained months of carefully gathered evidence. "I've been ready for this since the day Kinsley slammed the door in my face," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. The front door of the house opened before we even reached it. Marshall appeared first, his face pale and confused as he took in the sight of the convoy. Behind him, Kinsley pushed past, her perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled, her usual composure cracking as she recognized me walking up the path she'd forbidden me to cross. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, but I could hear the fear beneath her bravado. Damien stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. At 42, he had the kind of authority that came from years of winning cases that others deemed impossible. "Ms. Kinsley Holloway, I'm Damien Cooper, attorney for Mrs. Norma Holloway. We need to discuss some irregularities regarding the estate of Robert Holloway." "I don't know what you're talking about," Kinsley said, but her eyes darted nervously between Damien and the small army of legal professionals spreading across her front lawn. "I think you do." Damien opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents. "Shall we discuss this here, in front of your neighbors, or would you prefer to do this inside?" Marshall finally found his voice. "Mom?" His eyes met mine for the first time in months. "What's going on?" "What's going on," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the afternoon air, "is that your wife stole my inheritance, manipulated your dying father, and left me to struggle with nothing while you both enjoyed money that was rightfully mine." The color drained from Marshall's face. "That's impossible. Dad's will—" "Your father's will was forged," Damien interrupted smoothly. "Or rather, the power of attorney used to change it was obtained through fraud. Mrs. Kinsley Holloway convinced your father to sign legal documents while he was heavily medicated and incapable of understanding what he was agreeing to. That's a lie." Kinsley's voice had risen to a near shout. "Robert wanted everything to go to Marshall. He told me so himself." "Really?" Damien pulled out another document. "Because this is a recording of your conversation with James Patterson, the estate attorney, made on March 3rd of last year. Would you like me to play it for everyone to hear?" Kinsley went very still. "I don't know what you think you have. I have you admitting that Robert was confused about his estate decisions. I have you instructing Patterson to ensure that the old woman, that would be Mrs. Holloway, wouldn't complicate things for Marshall. I have you explicitly stating that Robert's original will needed to be updated to reflect current realities." Marshall looked like he might be sick. "Kinsley, what is he talking about?" But Damien wasn't finished. "I also have medical records showing that Robert Holloway was on a morphine drip the day he supposedly signed the power of attorney. I have testimony from 2 nurses who state that he was semi-conscious at best during that entire week. You can't prove any of this," Kinsley said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Actually, I can." Damien gestured to one of his associates, who stepped forward with another file. "I have Robert's real final will, signed 3 days before your fraudulent power of attorney, witnessed by 2 attorneys and notarized. In this will, his true last wishes, Mrs. Norma Holloway inherits $4 million, Marshall inherits $1.5 million, and the rest goes into trust for the grandchildren." The words hit Marshall like physical blows. He actually staggered backward, catching himself against the doorframe. $4 million? But the lawyer said there wasn't enough money. "The lawyer lied," I said quietly. "Just like your wife lied. Just like you chose to believe their lies rather than help your own mother." "I didn't know," Marshall whispered. Mom, I swear I didn't know. Didn't know what? That your wife was a manipulative thief? Or that you were perfectly willing to let me become homeless while you lived in luxury? Kinsley suddenly lunged forward, her composure completely shattered. You can't prove anything. Robert was my father-in-law. I had every right to help him with his affairs. Help him? Damien's voice was ice cold. Is that what you call convincing a dying man to sign documents he couldn't understand? Documents that violated his true wishes and left his wife of 42 years with nothing but debts? She didn't deserve it. The words exploded out of Kinsley before she could stop them. She's nothing. A nobody. She worked in an office answering phones. Marshall is Robert's legacy, his heir. She was just. Just what? I asked quietly. Just his wife? Just the woman who worked 2 jobs to help him build his business? Just the mother who raised his son? But Kinsley was beyond rational thought now. You think you're so innocent. You think you deserve sympathy. But where were you when Robert was building his empire? Where were you when he needed real support, not just coffee and filing? I was working, I said simply. I was raising your husband. I was taking care of Robert's father when he was dying. I was doing everything a wife and mother is supposed to do while you were. Where were you, Kinsley? Oh, that's right. You didn't exist in our lives yet. Marshall was staring at his wife with growing horror. Kinsley, tell me you didn't do this. Tell me you didn't steal from my mother. I protected our family, she screamed. I protected our future. That money should go to people who matter, not to some washed-up old woman who— Stop. Marshall's voice cut through her tirade like a knife. Just stop talking. He turned to Damien, his face ashen. What happens now? Now, Damien said calmly. Mrs. Kinsley Holloway faces charges for elder fraud, document forgery, and theft. The fraudulent will is voided, and Mrs. Norma Holloway's rightful inheritance is restored. Additionally, she'll be seeking damages for the suffering she's endured due to this fraud. How much? Marshall's voice was barely audible. The inheritance itself is $4 million. The house you're living in, which was illegally transferred out of the marital estate, is worth $1.2 million. The emotional distress damages. Damien paused, consulting his notes. Well, let's just say your wife's actions have been very expensive. Kinsley looked around desperately, as if searching for an escape route. But she was surrounded by lawyers, investigators, and neighbors who had heard every word of her confession. This isn't over, she said finally, her voice shaking with rage. I'll fight this. I'll prove that Robert wanted— You'll prove what? Damien interrupted. That you convinced a drugged, dying man to sign documents that betrayed his wife? That you manipulated him while he was vulnerable? That you stole from a widow and left her homeless? He pulled out one final document, because this is a restraining order, preventing you from disposing of any assets or leaving the state while this case proceeds. Your bank accounts are frozen as of this morning. The blood drained from Kinsley's face. You can't do that. I already did. Damien's smile was predatory. You see, Kinsley, you made one crucial mistake. You thought Mrs. Holloway was powerless. You thought she had no one to fight for her. You forgot that sometimes the people you dismiss as worthless turn out to have very powerful friends. He gestured to the convoy of cars, to the team of lawyers and investigators, to the very obvious display of legal and financial resources arrayed against her. Mrs. Norma Holloway didn't just help pay for my college education. She gave me a home when I had nowhere else to go. She showed me what family really means. And I've spent the last 15 years building the kind of practice that specializes in destroying people like you. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the neighbors who had gathered to watch the spectacle seemed frozen, stunned by the magnitude of what they'd witnessed. Finally, Marshall spoke. Mom, he said quietly, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I looked at my son, really looked at him, for the first time in months. I could see the boy I'd raised struggling with the man he'd become, the shame and guilt warring with relief that the truth was finally out. I know you are, I said. but sorry isn't enough. Not anymore. Because while part of me felt vindicated, another part of me realized that this victory came at a terrible cost. I had gotten justice, but I had lost my family in the process. Marshall would never forgive himself for what he'd allowed to happen. And Kinsley. Well, Kinsley would never forgive any of us for destroying the life she'd built on lies. As Damien's team began serving legal papers and Kinsley was led away for questioning, I found myself wondering if winning felt as good as I'd thought it would. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new home, a modest but comfortable house that I'd bought with my restored inheritance, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. For the first time in over a year, I wasn't worried about money or eviction notices or medical bills. More importantly, for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't responsible for anyone but myself. The legal proceedings had concluded 3 weeks ago. Kinsley pled guilty to elder fraud and document forgery in exchange for a reduced sentence of 18 months in prison and full restitution. James Patterson, the estate attorney, lost his license and faced his own criminal charges for his role in the scheme. The house I'd lived in for 20 years was returned to me, though I chose to sell it rather than live with those memories. Marshall kept the $1.5 million that his father had actually intended for him, a substantial inheritance, though far less than the $5 million he'd enjoyed for those months. He'd used most of it to pay my legal fees and the damages the court had awarded me for emotional distress. It seemed fitting somehow. The sound of a car in my driveway interrupted my morning coffee. Through the window, I saw Marshall getting out of his sedan, moving slowly like a man who had aged years in just a few months. He'd been calling regularly since the trial ended, asking to visit, asking to talk. Today was the first time I'd said yes. I opened the door before he could knock. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." He looked older, thinner. The stress of the divorce proceedings. Kinsley had tried to take half of his remaining assets before fleeing to her mother's house in Arizona, had taken its toll. But there was something different in his eyes. Something that reminded me of the boy he used to be before Kinsley shaped him into someone I didn't recognize. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "Coffee's fresh." We sat at my kitchen table in uncomfortable silence for several minutes. Marshall stared into his cup as if it might provide answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. "The house looks good," he said finally. "Peaceful." "It is." I studied his face, looking for signs of the man who had let his wife humiliate me, who had stood silently while I begged for help. "How are the children?" His face crumpled slightly. "They're confused. They don't understand why Mommy had to go away, why we had to move out of the big house. Emma keeps asking when she can see Grandma Norma again." The mention of my granddaughter, the little girl I'd been forbidden to see for so many months, sent a sharp pain through my chest. But I kept my expression neutral. "And how are you handling that?" I tell them the truth, in terms they can understand. That Mommy made some very bad choices and hurt people she should have protected. That actions have consequences. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. I tell them about my mother, who I should have protected but didn't. "Marshall, no, please. Let me say this. He set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. "I've been going to therapy, trying to understand how I became the kind of man who could abandon his own mother. Trying to figure out when I stopped being your son and started being Kinsley's puppet." I waited, saying nothing. "The therapist says it was gradual. That Kinsley isolated me from you systematically, convinced me that your values were old-fashioned, that your expectations were unreasonable. She made me believe that successful people like us, had different obligations than regular families. And you believed her. I wanted to believe her. The admission came out like a confession. Because it was easier than admitting that I was becoming someone Dad wouldn't recognize. Someone you didn't raise." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "I wrote you a letter, trying to explain, to apologize. But every time I read it, it sounds like excuses. Maybe that's because they are excuses." Marshall flinched as if I'd slapped him. "Maybe they are. Maybe there's no excuse for what I did." But Mom, I need you to know that when Kinsley told me you were asking for money, she said you were trying to guilt me into supporting your lifestyle choices. She said you'd always been financially irresponsible, that Dad had complained about it before he died, and you believed her without asking me. I believed her because I wanted to. His voice broke, because taking care of you would have meant admitting that Kinsley was wrong about something. And I couldn't do that, because my whole life was built on believing she was always right. I sipped my coffee, letting the silence stretch between us. Part of me wanted to comfort him, to tell him it was okay, that I forgave him. But the larger part of me, the part that had spent months wondering if my own son cared whether I lived or died, wasn't ready for that. What do you want from me, Marshall? I want to earn back the right to be your son. And how do you plan to do that? I don't know. The honesty in his admissions surprised me. I've destroyed my children's stability, lost most of my inheritance, and discovered that the woman I married is a criminal who is using me to steal from my own mother. I don't even know who I am anymore, much less how to fix what I've broken. For the first time since he'd arrived, I felt a flicker of something like sympathy. The children. How are they really? They're resilient. Kids always are. Emma talks about you all the time, asks when we can visit Grandma's new house. Jake is younger, but he remembers your voice. Asks for Grandma's stories at bedtime. My throat tightened. I'd missed so much of their lives already. I was thinking, Marshall continued carefully, maybe you'd like to see them sometime, when you're ready. If you're ready. Without Kinsley around to forbid it? Kinsley has no say in anything anymore. The divorce is final next month and I have full custody. He paused, seeming to gather himself. She showed her true colors during the proceedings. Even her own lawyer was disgusted by some of the things she tried to do. I thought about my grandchildren, about the years of their lives I'd already lost, about the relationships Kinsley had severed with her greed and manipulation. I'd like to see them, I said finally, but Marshall, I need you to understand something. What happened between us? It changed me. I'm not the same woman who used to worry about whether you approved of me, who used to sacrifice my own needs to keep peace in the family. I know. I'm not going to pretend that everything is fine just to make you feel better about what you did. I wouldn't want you to. And I'm not going to be anyone's emergency backup plan anymore. I'm not going to be the grandmother you call when you need a babysitter but ignore when it's inconvenient. I understand. I studied his face, looking for signs of the entitlement and selfishness that had made him so easy for Kinsley to manipulate. What I saw instead was genuine remorse and something that looked like the beginning of wisdom. There's something else, he said quietly, about Dad. What about him? I found some of his old papers when I was cleaning out the house, personal things that weren't part of the estate. There were letters he wrote but never sent, including one to you. He pulled another envelope from his jacket, this one yellowed with age. He wrote it about a month before he died, I think. I think he knew what Kinsley was doing, but he was too weak to fight it. With trembling hands, I took the letter and opened it. Robert's familiar handwriting, shaky from illness but still recognizably his, covered 2 pages. The words blurred as I read them, but the meaning was clear. He had loved me until the end. He had been sorry for being too sick to protect me. He had trusted that Marshall would take care of me when he was gone. He had been wrong about our son, but he had never stopped loving me. He asked me to make sure you were taken care of, Marshall said softly. In the letter, he talks about how proud he was of the woman you'd become, how grateful he was for everything you'd sacrificed for our family. He said I was lucky to have you as a mother, and that he hoped I would be worthy of your love. I wiped my eyes, folding the letter carefully. Thank you for bringing this to me. I failed him, didn't I? Failed you both. Yes, I said simply. You did. Marshall nodded, accepting the judgment without argument. Can I ask you something, Mom? What? Do you think it's possible for someone to come back from something like this? To earn forgiveness? I thought about Damien, about the scared, grieving boy who had grown into a man of integrity and strength. I thought about the choices that define us, about the possibility of redemption, about the difference between being sorry and being changed. I think, I said carefully, that forgiveness isn't something you earn. It's something you receive as a gift, if and when the person you've wronged decides to give it. And do you think you'll ever be ready to give that gift? I looked at my son, really looked at him, and for the first time in months, I saw traces of the boy I'd raised. Not the man Kinsley had molded, but the child who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers, who used to curl up next to me during thunderstorms, who used to tell me I was the best mom in the world. I think, I said slowly, that's going to depend on who you choose to be from now on. Marshall nodded, understanding that this was not absolution but possibility. Would it be okay if I brought the kids by this weekend, just for an hour or so? I smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. I'd like that. After he left, I sat on my porch swing, watching the sun climb higher into a cloudless sky. For the first time in my adult life, I had no one to take care of but myself, no husband to worry about, no son to enable, no family drama to manage. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. I thought about the woman I'd been before Robert got sick, always busy, always caring for someone else, always putting my own needs last. That woman was gone, buried alongside the illusions I'd held about family loyalty and unconditional love. In her place was someone harder but wiser, someone who understood that love without boundaries is just enabling, someone who knew that forgiveness without change is meaningless, someone who had learned, finally, that the most important person to take care of was herself. The future stretched ahead of me, uncertain but full of possibility. Maybe Marshall would prove worthy of a second chance. Maybe he wouldn't. Maybe my grandchildren and I would build the relationship that Kinsley had tried to destroy. Maybe we wouldn't. But for the first time in my 70 years, those outcomes didn't depend on my willingness to sacrifice myself for others. They depended on other people proving they deserved a place in my life. And that, I realized as I rocked gently in the morning sun, was exactly as it should be. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.